Welcome to the studio review for chapter 14. This is the second studio in the spa user or spa day series. So you're going to use the same repo you used for chapter 13, but you're going to switch to a different branch called user signup starter. And we're going to actually add a model user in addition to a client model. So they kind of refactored everything from the original project and moved a bunch of things into a client model and updated the spa day controller. They put the form, the menu form into a template down here instead of just returning it as a response body in the controller. So we can take a look at this for a second. You can kind of see that the form, is now a service selection. So you can go here and see here's the form where they select the skin type and the mani-pedi. And then the post for the form actually still accepts skin type and mani-pedi, and then, passes that down, but it actually creates a client. And so that client class, if we look here, is now where they have everything encapsulated here into skin type and nail service and appropriate facials to be stored with that client profile. And then check skin type is one of the methods here, as is the set appropriate facials. So it's all the same code they had before, except that it's now organized as a model. But we're not really concerned with the client for the studio. We're actually concerned with a user, which could be that you have a user that is not also a client. So they want to create a separate profile for that that's just concerned with things like the username and the email and password. So let's take a look at this. It says the first thing we want to do is to create some files for this, a user controller, and a new directory for in the templates for an index and add files, and then also a user class to have a model. So we're going to go ahead and set up those initial files, and then we'll be able to come in and follow the directions to render the add user form, to process that form, and to refine the submission with a few last things here that will add more usability for the user. So, okay, let's start right here. We'll set up the user controllers. So I'm going to come to controllers, right click, say new Java class. Oh, there is one thing I forgot to mention. This starter code has the same issue as the previous starter code, where they put the styles.css file directly in static instead of putting it in the directory CSS. So I'm going to do what I did last time, and I'm just going to create that and drag it and drop it and refactor it. And now if we go to some of these where they actually have this in here, you can see that they expected that CSS directory to be there. So now all of these should work. We can go ahead and actually spin this up with 2 before we get started. Just you can see that it still functions the way that it did before. So I'll come up in here and go to localhost 8080, and we have the form. Choose a skin type, choose a mani or a pedi, submit. You get the same things that we had last time. Now notice there's no bonus missions. This is the result of the basic studio from last time. So you're not going to see that extra footer or the option to have both mani and pedi. But that's okay, because we're going to focus on something completely different today. We're actually not really going to be on these pages a whole lot. So let's go back over here and we'll continue with creating these files. Okay, so we'll go to controllers and right click and go to Java class, and then have user controller and create that. We'll get that started in a minute. We also need to come down here to our templates, create a subdirectory here called user. Let me just make sure, is it user or users? I think it's user. Yeah. Oops. And by doing that, I have to start over. Okay. Here we go, user singular. And then inside here, we want a time leaf template called index. and another time leaf template called add. Okay, it will have a page for the user and also an add form for the user. Okay. So coming back to our instructions, we also need the user class. That's what we want to do now. So let's go to the models and add a new class, call it user. All right, and then we will follow the instructions here. It says that it should have a few private fields with getters and setters, and that will be username, email, and password. So that's no problem. We know how to do this. So we'll start out with private string username, private string email, and private string password. Now, we are not hashing the password. We're not, making it secure. That's something that we'll do is in conjunction with storing things in databases. We're just storing this as a string for now, which is not done in the real world, but it's going to satisfy just the process of what we need to do for tonight. And then as we add more complexity to this app, you'll find that we're not storing this as just as a string anymore. Okay, and so we need a constructor, and we can make a basic constructor on those three. We can add getters and setters for all three. And that's the extent to which we need to do things for now. Okay, so next, in the controller, we want to have a method display add user form, and we're going to render that form. It's going to point to, it's going to have the path /user/add as a route, and we're also going to return the path within the project structure to that add template that we created. Okay, so back to the controller, and I'm going to actually close the ones we're not using now. All right, user controller, here we go. We will create, first of all, we need to make this a controller. And I skipped this step before, and it was actually in the instructions, so sorry about that. They mention here that you want to make sure to add that controller annotation and also add this request mapping with the route user. So we need to do that as well. And that way, we will be basing this entire controller on this route, and we'll only have to specify what comes after that. So that leads us to our first handler, and we can just make it to the same thing that it already is based on, which is /user. And this is going to be very straightforward. Public string display user, no, add user form. There we go. And we'll just return /user/add, which corresponds to the relative path from templates, because Spring knows to look in templates, and then we just have to tell it, go to the user directory and go to that add form. That's the template we want to return. Okay. So that's this part right here. And so now we want to go into that template and create the form that's going to have those inputs. We want not only the username and email and password, we also want an extra password field to verify the password. And we can make sure that we have a separate name for that as well. So let's go over to add, and we'll get this started. So one thing I want to do is go to, see, these are both new. Let's go to one of the ones that already exists, and we'll get this link for this CSS file and go ahead and make sure that's included as well. And we'll call this add user, or maybe we could just say sign up. All right, and in the body, we'll just create our form. We're going to keep this real straightforward. And we'll set an action. We want this to go to the route /user, and we want the method to be post, because we're going to have separate get and post handlers for the same route. Okay. So inside the form, we will do a series of labels and inputs. I'm going to say username, and then have an input that's of type text. You don't have to put type text if it's just text. It's actually the default, but I'll do it explicitly anyway. I may have not done that in my solution, I'm not sure. Name equals username, and we want the, let's just do that for now. Okay. But I do need to make it self-closing. There we go. My goodness. All right. So I've got username as a label. I've got the input, the type is text, and the name of it is username. And this is important, as we'll find out as we go, that this be exactly the same as the name of the field in the model itself, because they need to correlate all the way from the view back to the model. Okay, so we'll get back to our form. I'm going to create 4 more of these, but they're each going to be a little different. So we'll have email, password, and verify password. And then here, instead of having type equals text, we'll try type equals email. The browser actually has some built-in validation for that. We're going to talk about explicit validation in the next class, but for now, we'll just take advantage of what the browser has to offer. And here, if we set this to type equals password on both of these, it will hide, you know, that's where it puts the little dots instead of the actual thing, so that nobody looking over your shoulder can see what you're typing. And of course, we need to give these unique names. So we'll go with email and password. And this one, I'm just going to call verify. And now we have 4 fields, but we need a button. So let's do that real fast. Button type equals submit. And then we can just say sign up. Okay. All right. Oops. Let's go back over here. Okay. So we have created our display handler, our get handler to display this form. We have the form actually set to post. So we're just going to need to actually have the handler that handles that post and creates the user with the information that's been provided. So they give you the signature here for this. You'll notice, you know, process add user form, which is our typical way of naming something like this. And we will put the post handling annotation on this, but you'll notice they're using model attribute annotation for model binding, so that we can actually, instead of having to return 4 different query parameters with request param, we can just submit, we can just tell Spring that we want it to use the first 3 and create user, because those are the 3 that match up. And then we'll have a separate parameter here just for verify, and that'll take care of everything. Okay. So, and this of course is here so that we can, you know, pass things on. So let's go ahead and get going on that. We'll come back over here to the controller and create our post handler. So we'll do post mapping, and this is also going to be at /user. So we'll just do it like that. Public string and process add user form model. There we go, model. And we want at model attribute user, and that's our user that we created in org.launchcode.model. So I'm going to choose that one, user, and then string verify, and that's the name that I gave it in the template. But it doesn't exist in user. It's only for the purposes of verifying before we are sure that we want to actually set the user into our data. Okay. Which we're not actually going to even do right away. We're not going to like be saving the user. We're just going to process this and get that going. Saving it to a data layer is something we're going to do as part of a bonus mission. All right, so the only thing here to do, as they tell us in the thing, in the instructions here, is to, yeah, don't worry about storing it yet, but just check that the verify parameter matches the password that's within the user object. So if it does, you can render the user index page so that we can, you know, welcome them and pass that information down. But if it doesn't match, we actually just want to send them back to the form. So let's just handle that basic logic first, And then we'll add some things to make it work even better. All right, so here we're just going to say if user.getPassword. So remember that, remember that when we do this with model attributes, Spring actually creates that user object behind the scenes based on the user class, based on that model. So we now have access to the getters. So I can just call that password up and say, okay, and remember, it's just a string. We're not hashing it. So we can compare it directly to verify here. And I'll use equals for string comparison because this is Java after all. And we'll just compare it against verify that's being passed in separately since it's not actually stored as part of user. And then we'll say if those things are not equal, I've got that, bang on the front for inequality, then we will return user, actually /user/add. Otherwise, and that's an early return. So down here, I can just say return /user/index instead. So we'll send them back to the form. If it doesn't equal, we'll continue back to the index page here. So we've got the routing taken care of in terms of which template to send them to next, but we still need to actually make sure that the information is sent down because they say right here that they want that index page to have a message that welcomes the user by their username when they get to that index page. Okay, so we need to actually modify index, which we created but have not actually done anything with here. And I'm going to do the same thing as I did with add. I'm going to put the CSS in here so it'll match the rest of the site. And we can say, I don't know, I guess for this one, something like, welcome. Sure, welcome will work. And if I spell it right, there we go. Okay, so let's greet them and we'll make this, I don't know, an H3. And what I need to do, if we want to be able to greet them by name, then we need to have some dynamic ability here. And that means we need to use time-leaf syntax instead of just hard coding something between the tags. So in the opening tag, I'm going to say th text equals, and then I'm going to concatenate this together. I'm going to say welcome. Oops, did I put a backtick? I did that last time. Oh, okay. Single quotes, welcome, and then plus, and then I use a time-leaf variable expression with a $sign and say user.username. And then I'm going to add another single quote there and just have a little exclamation point on the end. Oops, I think I didn't close my single quote. There we go. Okay. So that entire thing concatenates together, and then it's, created as the inner text here between the tags. And then we can, have a link. Let's see, what did they say? They want, this might be later, it might be later down that they say this, or maybe this might be something that I just added, where I'm actually going to send them on, oh, they do say it. I think it just says it later down somewhere else, but they want us to send them on so that they actually can go then to the page where they make their selections on their services. So we are going to have a href here, and technically we wouldn't have to do this with time-leaf if we don't want to, but we can do it, it's fine. I'm going to go ahead and just use this link expression here to include just the slash, because we're basically saying we just want to send them to the homepage. Localhost 8080 is our homepage. And that's where that form lives for them to select their services by giving us their information. Okay, so select your spa services here. Okay. And that's just a link. It'll take them back. That should be all we really need to do for this. All right. So let me go back over to here. The problem is we have not actually passed the user down yet, have we? So we're going to go back to the controller and make sure that if we send them to this page, they actually have the user available to get that username from. So I'm going to change this and just add one more line here for now that uses that model class that, remember, this doesn't have anything directly to do with the model class over here. What this is a way for us to add those attributes and pass things on to the template. So model.add attribute, we're going to say we want to send the user down. So let's just take the user that we already have that Spring has created for us with all of the query parameters that came from the form, and we're just going to pass that user object down to this index page. And then the page itself in the template is accessing the username. And remember, we can do this with dot notation because Spring knows to do, when we do that, to use the getter, get username. Even though this is a private field, we can still do this because Spring takes care of it for us. Okay, so we've got that. And that's going to be all we need to do for right this moment. We'll add some more things to this later in the bonus missions and further down. All right, so let's test this out. Let's restart our app here and come over. And we're going to try to go to /user here because we don't have a link to get in. We're just going to type it in. Okay, so here's our form with our 4 fields. And I can put in, Carrie and Carrie@jones.com and put in some sort of password and say sign up. And then it says, welcome, Carrie. So it passed my name down. I passed the user down. I was able to get the username off of it. And it has a link here, and this takes us to here. This is exactly what we wanted to see. So let's go back to here. And let's try some. I want to show you how this built-in validation works. So let's say that I just tried to put in Carrie here for the email. The browser actually has this validation because I set this input as type equals email. It knows to actually say, it's missing that @ And so I could say, okay, Carrie@Jones. And if I don't put a .com or anything on there, ooh, I lied. It accepted it. Okay. I was expecting that it was actually going to also enforce the period. It did not. It's just looking for the @ symbol. So that's something that's why most people write their own validation for these types of things so that they can be very specific. That's okay. Okay, so we got past that one. But you'll notice it let me continue even though I didn't have passwords in there. That's a problem. We can go over here and go to the form and actually add something for now to make it force it to be required. We can add this required attribute on. And if you do it like this without a value attached, like required equals true or false, it just automatically makes it equal true when you do this with something that has a Boolean value. So you can just add it just like that. So if we do this now, and I try to access that form again, so I'm going to come up here and hit enter to get back to the form. If I try to hit sign up right now, it's going to say, please fill out this field because I didn't fill it out. If I do this one, it's going to say, oh, this one's required too. And so, you can keep controlling those kinds of things. I mean, I really should put it on email too, but so on and so forth. And, it'll make you continue. So now let's test what happens when we actually have mismatched passwords. So I'm going to put oops in here and say sign up, and nothing happens except it sent us back to the form, which is what we want. So that's not super clear to the user, right? I say, okay, we sent them back to the form because they need to try again. And our logic and our controller took care of that here. But there's nothing else going on that makes it helpful for them to know what did I do wrong. And you also know it blanked it out in a way that they have to completely start over, right? So this is where we can refine the submission a little bit. So we'll come to this section. And it says, to take them back to the root path. This is what I was looking for before. We already did this part. But if the form is re-rendered we want to let them know that it was not properly submitted. So we can have an error message. So we're just going to use that model.add attribute to pass down some sort of error message under the name of error. And then in the form, we can actually put something on the template that will show up conditionally only if that error message exists. So let's start with the controller. And then here we're going to say, let's have, model.add attribute. We'll call it error. And we'll say something simple like, passwords do not match. And that's fine. We can also come over then to the add form and somewhere right in here. And I would say, typically you would want to put it like close to where these are. So I'm just going to put it like right before the button. I'll say, oops, class. I'm going to add a CSS class to change the color as well. So I'm going to put that on there, and then I'm going to say if, and let me close that. If, and this is where we need a variable expression that just says if error exists. This is going to be what, the truthy falsy thing. If error exists, it's truthy, and this will return true. If it doesn't exist, this will return false, and it'll evaluate properly for this if. And then the last thing is to put the actual text we want to display between these p tags, if it does display, and that's going to be another variable expression that is the value of error itself. In this case, it's not looking for Boolean, it's looking for the actual content, which is a string. So this works as a Boolean, this works as a string, and that'll take care of it. Okay, so let's give this a try and rerun everything. All right, so I'm gonna rerun this page, and then we'll say Carrie at jones.com. Totally doesn't exist. I mean, maybe it does, but it's not mine. And then I'm going to put in two different things. I'm going to put in oops again as the second one. Now we see that passwords do not match. Now I said I was going to make this a different color, and I applied the class, but I did not actually go and edit the CSS. So let's go over and do that. And I'm just going to do a class called error. And I'm just going to basically say color is dark red. And so if we rerun this and do it again, since I forgot, continue. There we go. So now you see that the message actually shows up in red, which on a pink background, maybe it's not all that effective, but on a white page, it would look pretty normal. Okay, so let's go to the next part. The last part is, what if they come back, it would be nice to not clear the previous submission, and that happens by default. So what we'd like to do is to be able to bind the name, username and email fields as model attributes so that we can fill them as the values for those input fields, and they will show back up. And of course, if they don't exist, then they'll just be blank. All right, so we'll come back over here to the form, and let's do the controller part first. Yeah. So up here, before we create the error message even, let's go ahead and say add attribute, and we'll call it username and pass in user.getUsername. And then we'll do the same thing for email and say get email. And we aren't interested in refilling the password fields, right? Just these two. But we'll pass those down. So then in here, we can add one more attribute here, which is value, except we need it to be dynamic. So that means we need to use th value. And then we can use a variable expression to pass in username as a variable, which is not the same thing as just giving it the name username. These are actually two different things. And so I can add the same thing on here with email, just change it to email. And that will receive that value and place it in the field. So let's test it out, restart the app, come back over here, and I'm gonna refresh this entire thing. Okay, so I'm gonna put perfectly valid information in the first two fields, And our hope is that when we have mismatched passwords here, when I submit it, it will actually not only give us the message, but notice it kept these two because we set the value dynamically to be whatever it was that they had submitted the first time. So just to be clear, it created this for us automatically when the form was submitted. So we have access to the username and email that was created, but we didn't, we realized, oh, hey, those passwords don't match. And so we just extracted those from the object and just passed them right back down to that add form. And then in the add form, we were ready to receive a value to be placed inside the fields here. And that's where we get those from, because these correspond to these attribute names in these two lines. Okay. So that takes care of that. And that's pretty much the whole studio until you get to the bonus missions. The bonus missions are challenging. I'm going to say that right up front. So it's going to take a few minutes to work this out, but we're going to get it done. So first, we're going to add an ID field to the user. And of course, that means also adding like a next ID thing that will, allow each user to have a unique ID, which should be, pretty normal at this point. We've done it enough times in the past. And then we'll also create a data layer called user data that gives us a place to store all of the users and have some, add, get all, and get by ID static methods that we can call to get access to them as we're saving them. And then we'll update the index to actually display a list of all users by username. And we're going to create a new page, a new template that actually is for details that will use the user's ID to have a unique page with just their information. And you may remember when we were first learning about Spring and controllers that we learned about the path variable attribute. That's what's going to allow us to accomplish this. And then we'll, be able to wire all of that up between the controller and the template. All right, let's just focus on that. We'll come back to bonus mission 2 in a minute. So we're going to come over here to the user model and add our next ID and ID up here. So let me create first private static int next ID. It has to be static in order to be stored with the class and not with each individual object so that it always has an updated value. But here we want an instance variable private final because we don't want it to be overwritten int ID. And then in here, we can say this.id is equal to next ID, and then make sure that when the constructor is doing its thing, that we also increment next ID up for the next user that's created to have a new number. All right, and then we can create a getter for ID, because we're going to need that. And that should be it for now, I think. Yes. So we'll have that updated in our user. So now it's just a matter of creating this data layer. So let's come over here, and up here in the launch code package, we're going to create a new package called data. And inside that, we're going to create a new Java class. And this is not a model, it's just a Java class, and we're going to call it user data. And this is going to be a static class that's meant just to start storing our data so that we can collect the users. So we'll have first a map, private static final map that has, make sure I get that in there, that has an integer for the key and a user, one of our users, as the value in the key value pair. We'll call it users and just make it a new hash map. There we go. All right, now for the little methods that we need to give us the functionality. The first one is add. And it's important that it be static because we want to call it directly on the class. We don't have any objects being created from this class. This is purely for keeping track of these users. And we'll just say users.put, which is, just a map method. And then say, go to the user that we pass in and get their ID. And that's going to be the key. And then the entire user object is what will be the value. And that is exactly what we said that these maps would hold up here. All right, so that's going to allow us to add new users. This one is going to allow us to look them up by ID. So we'll say public static, but it's going to return a user object. And we'll say get by ID and then pass in an integer ID. And then just return users.get ID. Because the beauty of the system is that by storing these user objects in a map with the ID as the key, it's very easy to look them up. We don't have to iterate through an entire array list of users and check all the IDs. We can just look them up by key here, which is really nice. This is exactly how it's going to work when we start using databases too. So last one is to set a collection of users as the return type and call this one get all. We just want to go get all of them, but we need them in a list and not in a map. So we're going to just use collection generically to do that so that the template can immediately use them, use each object properly. And I failed. Oh, this is users. I see. There we go. I just had to make it plural. And that goes and gets just the values, the second half of these key value pairs, and puts them in a list that we can iterate through in the template. All right. So now that we have this set up, we can come back over to our controller and make sure that we're going to have to make changes to the template as well. But if we want to be able to display a list of users by username, it means we need to be able to pass them down into that template as well. So we'll come over to the controller where we actually are displaying the user page, which is this index page here. And right before we return it, we will create another attribute, this time called users. And we're going to go straight to the class user data that we created. This is our data layer, and call the get all method. And that will return that list we just talked about. And then we pass it down under the name users to the index. So let's go back over to the index so that we can now make use of that. Let's come down here and say, let's just maybe make an H2 and we'll have it just say users. And then below that, we can just maybe iterate over it. Let's use th block to do this. And we'll just say, we want a paragraph for each one, so it puts each one in a new line. So we'll use th each here to say, give me a user, and I'm going to call it some user. Since we already have a user being passed in, we want to be make sure that there's no confusion. So some user out of, and this is where we use our variable expression, users, it's being passed from the controller. And let's look at one user at a time. And then here we'll just make the text of this paragraph some user dot username. There we go. All right. Okay, so that's the first part, is to actually just get them displaying on the page, but we're not done because they also want us to use this as a link to go to a detail page. But let's just kind of stop here and make sure this works before we move on. So I'm going to restart the app because we've done quite a lot of coding, and I want to make sure this is going to work. Okay, I'm going to start fresh here. Say Carrie at students.com. It's going to yell at me for using a dumb password. And now we see select your spa services here, but we don't see users, and I know exactly why. There's one more step we forgot. It's not enough to say that you want to go get them. You have to actually save the user to the map in the first place, and we missed that part, didn't we? So user data dot add. So we created a method for that too, didn't we? And we'll just pass in the user. All right, let's try it again. That's an important step. All right, let's come here. Do it again. Okay, and we see right there that we have my name. Without refreshing the app, let's add another user. And we'll say Joe, and Joe at johnson.com, sure. And have another dumb password that it's gonna hate. Okay. And now we see users, Carrie, Joe. Okay, so we definitely are seeing this work, right? As we continue to add them, they're being stored over here in this, users map in the user data layer, which is kind of our stand-in for not having a database. And we're using these methods to add them and to, get the list and display it on the page. So this is good. So let's do the next step, which is to actually have a details page that will display the user's username and email if we click on a link. So we need to create a new template first. So inside the user folder, I'm going to create another timely template just called details. And we will fill this out in a second. Let's come over here to the controller, because we're going to need a controller method for this. And this is where we're going to have to kind of harken back to our lesson on Spring and controllers, because we haven't done this since then. But we'll do details slash, and you have to use curly braces to represent the ID, which is going to be a path variable. And then we'll just have public string display user details. And then we'll use the path variable annotation to say we're going to be receiving, or actually we're going to be providing, is a better way of putting it. And we're providing it this way, this path variable here. And we're going to also be passing down some information. So I'm going to add that. And so we'll say, okay, we want information on the user. So let's add attributes. And this is where we say, okay, the only thing we know when we start out here is what ID we have. So this is where, in order to figure out what user object to pass down, we use the method we wrote called getById from our user data class that actually allows us to pass that ID down and return the user object. That's our return here, users.getID from the map. Okay, so that'll allow us to pass that down, and then we just need to return the path to the template. And notice here that I'm not putting anything about an ID number or anything, because this is the path in our file structure that goes from templates to this details.html. So this is correct. This is what we want. This is where we actually are saying this is what the route is going to be in the browser, and we'll be able to see that. If we have a ID of 24, we will see /details/24 after localhost 8080 and users in here. So we'll see that in a second when we get there. So we have a way to handle that now. We have a handler for this path variable, and then we have a details page. We're passing down the user to it. So now it's just a matter of actually filling out what's on here. We can do like we've been doing and grab the same CSS file and put that in here. we can say, user details or something generic like that'll work. And then in here, let's have a paragraph that says user, and then we'll use a span to do the dynamic data, just because that way it'll stay in line with the paragraph. We're going to say user.username. And then, oops, close the span. And then I can repeat that here for the email. And we'll say user.email. And that should display the two of those on the page. And that's all we have for right now. Let's give this a try. I think I've gotten everything. All right, so we're going to come over here to this. Let's start fresh and say, oh, no, I did forget. I knew I was forgetting something. We have to go to the index page. We have to turn this into a link, right? Right now, we're just displaying the name, but we haven't actually added a link. So we're going to need to put, I'm going to wrap this anchor tag around the paragraph and just use the link expression here. So href equals, and we want to use that link expression like this, but I need to concatenate something, right? And this is where I want to first start with the general path. So we know that we want to go to /user/details, but this is where the dynamic part comes in. We want to add on their specific ID, and we need to get that from some user. So we'll put a variable expression inside our link expression, which is totally valid syntax. In fact, it's the only way this will work. And then we need to say some user.id. So this will evaluate some user.id, concatenate it together with the hard-coded string /user/details/, and then that entire thing will be the correct path for getting to that details page for that user. Now I can restart it and we can try this again. Because we can't really try to get to the details page without the link. All right, so I'm going to put in Carrie at Jones, at jones.com. And so now it's a link. And if I click on this link, sure enough, I get localhost 8080/user/details/1, which is my username. My ID. And then it says user Carrie, email Carrie@jones.com. All right, so we've got a details page working. So this is the end of bonus mission 1. For bonus mission 2, we want to do a little bit more work. We want to add a date field in user and initialize it to the time that the user joined, which basically just means, when this object is created, get the date and time right now. And instead of date, I'm going to use the more modern local date, but it's the same idea. And then we want to just display that on that user detail view. So we're going to have one more piece of information under here. So first we need to go to the model and we need to add one more field here. So I'm going to just add private local date. Local date comes from java.time, a package that's included. And I'll say date registered. We can also make this final because it's never going to be changed after we set it. And what we do in here is just go ahead and say this dot date registered equals, and then we just go directly to the local date class and call now. And it goes and gets the current date for us and stores it in here. And then we just need to have a getter for it. So I'm going to come down here and add the getter. Okay. So that'll take care of that. So now we're going to go over, and because this is encapsulated as part of our user model, when we get to the controller here and I'm saying I've got this details page and I want to pass information down, I don't need to pass any more information down than I already have, because we're sending the entire user object into this template. So I already have the user available to me. Now I have another property that I can access. That's all that's going on. So I'll come back to the details page and we'll add something here. I want to add just for interest, I'm going to add an HR. This is a super old school way of putting a line on the page. Not really done these days. It's more likely that somebody would, have something with CSS that would be done. But I'll use it anyway, because we're, running short on time. So we'll have, I'm going to do some small text. And it's just going to say, remember what I put. User since, and then we can have a span that actually is our dynamic text. And say, just go get user.date registered. Okay, and that will insert that information dynamically for us. All right, let's run it. I'm going to go back to, actually, I should be able to just resubmit this. Maybe not. Yep, because we restarted the app. Okay, so go to user, go here. All right, go to the details page, and there it is. User since 2023-10-05. All right, that was the very last thing to do with the bonus missions. Thanks for hanging with me. Hope this has been helpful, and I will see you the next time.